Hey listeners, this is your host Brian Almeida. I have a special announcement before we get started on this week's solo episode. I'm going to be offering a handful of my guests what I want to call a 15-minute discoverable call. This is just 15 minutes with me to discuss anything you want, podcasting, something going on in your life, facing vulnerability, whatever it might be. I'm going to include a link for my calendar in the show notes where you can book your 15-minute call, and I look forward to speaking with some of you soon. Thanks and take care. Welcome to the Vulnerable Podcast. I'm your host, Brian Almeida. Each week we'll share inspiring stories and tips on facing vulnerability and the lessons we can use to help us be able to find success and fulfillment in our own lives. With each episode, we hope to impact one listener, and if anything you've heard has impacted you, we'd appreciate you sharing it on social. Thank you for listening. Now let's get vulnerable. This is episode 5 of Relatable Thursdays. Hey listeners, welcome back for episode 5 of Relatable Thursdays. On this week's episode, I want to discuss family. I think it's something that most of us can relate with, and really what I want to get into is sort of how the relationship of families works. And for me, it hasn't always been, great. It's really good right now. I think a lot of that's just because I've taken time to discover who I am, and rather than sort of blaming people or assuming that, I'm being judged or whatever the case, the things that I've thought in the past, I've taken time to just sort of accept things for what they are, accept people for who they are, and just worked more on the relationship rather than thinking all these things that may necessarily not be true. So, to get into a couple of stories in terms of, my family relationships, one of the first ones that I want to discuss is the relationship with my mother. So my mother and I were very close growing up. We'd watch movies together, we'd hang out together. We'd do a lot together, whether it was going shopping or whatever it might be. And, I really valued that relationship. But then about 12 years ago, my last year of college, I decided that I was going to move out for my last year of college. More specifically, I was going to move out with the girl that I was dating at the time. And for me, it was this, I felt like I needed some independence. I was maybe 21, 20, I think, probably around 21 years old at the time. And just thought, it's time for me to grow up. I think a lot of that might have been influenced by the person that I was dating. But nonetheless, I made the move and I decided to move out. But for some strange reason, aside from feeling like I needed that independence, I basically distanced myself from my entire family for an entire year. I didn't really talk to anybody. I didn't call my mom. I didn't go back home. I just completely distanced myself. And it wasn't just my mom. I mean, like literally pretty much everybody in my family, brothers, aunts, uncles, grandparents, like almost everybody in my family, I distanced myself from. And again, I couldn't really tell you why that was. I think some of it just had to do with, the person that I was with, and some of it had to do with me just figuring out who I was. And again, that's something that I've struggled with for many years, like literally up until the last 2 or 3 years. I've gone, back and forth on, who I am, what I want, and always sort of felt like I needed to do things my way. And I think that was part of the reason that I made that move, is that I felt like I needed to just show something. I needed to show that I could do this. I needed to show that I could be out on my own. And believe me, I made many mistakes aside from, sort of hurting the relationships with my family. But we won't get into that today. Maybe another episode. Another story that I can share is the relationship that I had with one of my brothers. My eldest brother and I, when I was in college, again, we became very close. He's about 9 years older than me. So in college, 18, 19, 20 years old, we started to become a lot closer because we could do more together. I could go out with him. We could hang out more often. He lived in Toronto, so me being in Toronto made it easier for us to get together more often. And so we grew this really great bond, and he was literally my best friend. Like I would talk to him about everything. I could call him, and any evening and just be like, hey, can we go for a beer? And for the most part, we would be able to get together and have a beer or coffee or something, and just have really great conversations. And then one thing I realized now is that when he met his now wife, and when we sort of, I guess, when we gain these new families in our life, when we gain our own family aside from the family that we grew up with, it can cause sort of these separations. So, for me with him, I felt like, that he'd met this new girl and he was really serious about her. And I had like a resentment towards her, which probably wasn't very smart on my behalf and probably didn't make any sense really. But it was just this person, like I said, that came into his life that all of a sudden got all of his attention. I felt like I was left out. And I don't think that that was the case whatsoever. I think it's just that when you start to build your own family, like I said, there's now a family that in some ways becomes more important in your life, because now you have to focus on them, pay attention to them. You're doing everything in your life for them. Going to work, to pay for bills, to food, whatever it might be. You have your own family to take care of, and so we just sort of, these other relationships in our life, as much as we still care about them, they just, it's a lot of energy to sort of separate yourself in multiple different ways, right? And again, my part of my problem was the fact that I felt like she had done something when she really hadn't. So I, instead of calling him and contacting him and trying to continue to keep our relationship strong, I just neglected it and blamed it on something else rather than on myself. And I think, to round this all off, I think a lot of this is because, we feel in many ways that family is obligated to be there for us because they're our family. And I don't think that that's necessarily true. I don't think there is necessarily an obligation there. And that's really in any relationship. But in family specifically, I think we just have this, because we grow up for a good portion of our lives with those people, we just feel like, okay, well, you're always going to be there for me. And so we have this thing, this feeling that just tells us, okay, well, no matter what I do, no matter what mistakes I make, no matter if I treat them poorly or not, that they're always going to be there. So I don't know, for my listeners, if any of you guys have dealt with, have you dealt with, family issues? Have you dealt with poor relationships? Have you dealt with neglecting family members? If you have, here's a couple of things that I think can help you avoid this, or, if it's happened, you can move past it, or whatever the case might be. So for me, one of the biggest things that I think, and this has been an ongoing theme through other episodes, is communication. Like I said, when I moved away for that year, I didn't really call anybody. I didn't talk to anybody. I just sort of left my family wondering what was going on. And I think that communication is key, whether it's through a phone call, whether through an email, text message, a video call, whatever it might be. I remember growing up, my grandfather would call us every single Sunday night. We'd be watching TV with our parents, and then at some point in the evening, usually I think it was around maybe 7, 8 o'clock, the phone would ring, and it was always my grandfather. And he was really good at keeping that constant communication, that once a week call to say hello and see how we were doing, and so on and so forth. And even with my mother now, I see it with her mom, where I think it's pretty much nightly that they talk to each other. And I know it's something I definitely need to work on. Here I am telling everybody, communication is key, and it's something I need to work on and get better at. But, at least I've recognized it now, and I try and do a better job of reaching out more often. But it's a two-way street as well. I think another thing that we sort of get caught up in families is we feel like, okay, well, I called you last time, so you call me this time. It's this thing of like, keeping score essentially. And I think that that's really dangerous, because it shouldn't really matter who's putting in the effort at all times. It should be we should just put in effort all around. It shouldn't be, that if you don't call me for a week, then I'm not going to call you for a week, because then we're just sort of putting that communication and that opportunity to build our relationships off over and over and over again. We don't necessarily need to keep track of how much time somebody's putting in. We just need to be more present about the time that we spend. Around Christmas time this year, I remember being around my entire family and just sort of saying to everybody that, we get so caught up in life, in our jobs, in our bills, our mortgages, our this and our that we tend to think that, we've got so much going on and so much that's so important that sort of family becomes, the bottom of the barrel, when it should be at the top, because they're the most important thing in your life. My dad always used to say growing up that, and it was a little harsh, but he used to say that your wife is your wife only as long as she wants to be, whereas your mother and your family are there forever. And I see what he means now. And not that I have a bad relationship with my wife or that I'm worried that she's ever going to leave, knock on wood. But at the end of the day, my dad's right. Like, your family and your mother are going to be there for you forever. And so we need to sort of realize that and then put the effort in to make sure that they don't feel neglected or that they don't feel like we don't care, because I think at the end of the day we all do. We may just struggle with showing it, right? And then I think the other thing that is important is, and I mentioned this a bit when I talked about how I felt, like I needed to sort of do things to show that I could do them when I was younger. I think I felt a lot of judgment, because and again, this could be completely wrong, but I think I felt it because I was always a little bit different. I was always a little bit more of a risk taker. I was always a little bit, I was more of a talker than most people. I just was very different from most of my family, and I don't think that they were ever judging me, but I think that I sort of put that in my head that I'm different, and so they don't like who I am or they don't understand who I am, when that probably wasn't the case. But if that is something that you feel, maybe talk about it with your family. And I think that we can all accept each other for who we are. And I think that's come around a lot over the last few years of my life. I've taken a lot of different, I've made a lot of different choices, gone down a lot of different paths over the last few years. And I feel like I'm more accepted now. But I think it's just because I've shared more openly too. In the past, I sort of just did things and didn't really explain what was going on. I just assumed that everybody would understand what was going on, or that it didn't matter. They didn't need to know. And even if they did, they wouldn't care, whatever. It was a lot of assumptions, and assumptions are really bad because there's very little truth usually in them. Right. But I think at the end of the day, just accepting people for who they are, whether again, it's family, a brother, sister, a wife, another relationship or friendship, we need to have more acceptance for each other to help these relationships sort of grow and sustain them. So yeah, I mean, if I at the end of the day, I just hope that by sharing a little bit about what I've gone through in all these episodes, that I'm able to sort of help you guys improve whatever area it might be, whether it's grief, whether it's family, whether it's marriage, whatever it might be. Like I said, in this episode, I think the key points to remember are that we just need to communicate better with each other. We need to realize that, family members aren't obligated to be there for you at all times. Like, yes, they want to be, and yes, you want them to be, but it's still a relationship at the end of the day. It still needs to be nurtured. So you can't just go on the fact that, yeah, they're your family, so they have to be there. Right? The effort has to be given by all parties, but we need to be careful not to keep score and say, well, I've been doing this and they haven't been doing that. And, again, we're making these assumptions that they don't care as much or something, when it might just be that they're busier. Like, we all have different lives, we all have different things that we're doing. And like I said, when we start to get married and start our own families, then there's new obligations, there's new things that we have to sort of focus on. And so we can't hold it against somebody just because they don't call as often. And then, like I said, that last piece there is just really just to learn how to accept each other for who we are. We're all going to be different people. Like, we're not going to be the same, and we're not going to end up being the people that maybe we thought we were, or that somebody else thought we were going to be. Our parents might think that we're going to be doctors and we didn't turn out to be a doctor. Like, that's okay. Like I said, we need to accept each other for who we are as human beings, and not worry about, that we didn't turn out the way that it maybe should have been, or we thought it would be. Guys, if any of this relates to you, or if you ever want to talk to me, like I said on my last episode, reach out on social. Send me a message. There's a link in the show notes where you can book a 15-minute discoverable call, where we can spend a few minutes on the phone, and I can get into more detail about things that have happened, and maybe give you some more advice if necessary, or if it can help. And yeah, at the end of the day, that's what I'm here for. I want to help my listeners. I want to impact my listeners, and I hope that I'm doing that in some shape or form. So yeah, connect with me on social, book a discoverable call, whatever you guys want to do. Thank you for tuning in each week, and I look forward to doing this for a long time, because I really, like I said, I really hope that these subjects help you guys out. All right, guys, take care and see you next week. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed the podcast, please subscribe and follow the podcast on Instagram at vulnerable.podcast or on Facebook and LinkedIn. You can also follow me, Brian Almeida, by searching my name on all platforms. If the podcast has impacted you in any way, I would also greatly appreciate a review. Lastly, if you know anyone with a great story of going from struggle to success, I would love to have them on. Thank you and see you next week.